Hello and welcome. I'm Steve Clemens, editor-at-large of The Hill. Thanks for joining us today for our program on the new space age. This is the third program in our Aspiration and Resilience series, where we've been exploring the aspirations of Arab youth and why we in the United States should care. I'd like to thank our sponsor, the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates, the UAE, for making this series possible. Today's program is special and not just for space enthusiasts. What has taken place is in just the past few days and what will take place on Thursday could help us learn a whole lot about Mars and its ability to support life. I am really into Mars. The UAE's Hope probe and China's Tianwen-1 probe entered the Martian orbit a few days ago, and NASA's Perseverance rover will attempt to land on the red planet on February 18th. I hate saying attempt to land. It will land, right? It's going to land. We're certainly hoping these missions can provide valuable information about Mars, but could they also attract the next generation of visionaries into engineering and space? How are Arab youth and other young scientists viewing these developments? We've got a really fantastic lineup of speakers today. Astronauts, 2 of them, space agency chiefs, lots of them, students and a member of Congress. But before we get underway, a few housekeeping notes. You can tweet us at The Hill Events using the hashtag The Hill Space. I love The Hill Space. That's maybe our coolest hashtag this year so far. We're broadcasting live and we'll take your questions throughout the program. If you experience any trouble with the live stream, just push refresh the page and hopefully that fixes the problem. We recently learned the Biden administration will continue both the Space Force and the Artemis Program, the program that will send U.S. astronauts, the first woman and the next man, back to the moon. And in that endorsement, the administration has also echoed that the United States has its sights set on eventually sending American astronauts to Mars. Let's bring on our first speaker to discuss what we need in order to make all of that happen and how we can attract the best young talent. Congressman Frank Lucas of Oklahoma is the ranking member of the Committee on Science, Space, and Technology. His family goes back a century in Oklahoma. So does mine. Slightly out of his district. I'm from Bartlesville. But so we've got that. And, I know a lot of Bartians that are into space. So, Congressman, great to see you today. Thanks for joining us. Absolutely, Steve. Good to be with you. And for those who don't know Oklahoma, Bartlesville has trees. It rains over there once in a while. It's amazing. That's absolutely right. Congressman, let me ask you, I always like to ask people, I know you're ranking member of the, subcommittee on science and technology, and you've helped sponsor the RISE Act to promote more money into sort of research universities and science and whatnot. I always am interested in why you are such a policy wonk on this subject. What drew you to space and science? First off, Steve, I'm a land-grant university graduate, agricultural economics, but research, education, extension, informing and educating people. So it's my background from my undergraduate training. Science is the future of this country and of the human race. I'm old enough, Steve, I remember watching the Apollo landing on my parents' black and white television in 1969. Now, I was a little boy, but black and white, and we only received one TV station. I was 16 when the Viking landers, turned on the cameras on Mars the first time. So I'm part of that generation that watched Star Trek when it was first run. This is just a continuation of all those things we've done before, and it's where we go in the future. And a strong STEM program, bright young people engaging in engineering and mechanics and all of the sciences are not only how we got to this point, but how we're going to go forward in the future. So I equate science and the federal investment as determining what kind of future this nation has, and for that matter, the world. And I'm an eternal optimist. I'm a wheat farmer, so I'm optimistic if we'll invest in science, there's no telling what potential the future has for all of us. Congressman, I love that answer. There are a couple of cool things about today's program, including having you on it, but we've got some young people who actually worked on the UAE Hope Mars probe, both from Colorado, Arizona State University. We've got some folks from the UAE and other places that, they're in this world. Part of it. The other thing is we've got some astronauts involved, but just within the last 2 weeks, we're going to have the UAE Mars probe went into orbit around Mars. We've got China up with a probe, and we've got the United States again on Thursday. And I want to not do advertising for them, but any of you on Thursday that are not thinking about Mars, you can go to get Krispy Kreme and get the Mars edition of donut that day on Thursday. But we're going to be sending another rover into Mars. You get a sense that this is a geopolitical set of challenges as much as it is a science one when you look at China, the United States, the UAE. Your thoughts on that? Competition has always compelled us to move forward. I think back to Gemini, Mercury, for that matter, Apollo.
The old Cold War, the rush with the Soviet Union, competition with the Soviet Union helped drive us and them forward. I won't deny that that's one of the selling points now as we look forward. Now, in fairness to NASA, they've worked very hard on international partnerships, whether it's the Artemis Accord or trying to bring nations together to just participate in the Gateway program, things that would enable us to move forward in a transparent, peaceful fashion. That's ultimately how the off-world should be addressed, is in a transparent, peaceful fashion. But whatever it takes to focus Congress to get the administration to move us forward, we can't be starting and stopping, Steve, as we have for most of my life in the space program.
Can you mentioned the Artemis program. We have a lot of folks watching today who may not be tuned in to what that is. Can you share with us what the contours of that are and why it's so important to the United States?
Basically, it's going back to the moon. It's establishing a small space station around the moon that we can use to then work on the moon, come up and down from a port, so to speak. And it's the technologies that will be developed there, the skills that will be developed there, then that will enable us to go on to Mars. Because it's one thing to be a few days away from the moon and to be able to come home if we need to, or to be able to send resources. But when you're going to Mars, and depending on the orbit, a year and a half, 2 years away, you can't figure it out as you go. So Gateway and the effort to go back to the moon develops the skills to take us on to the next planet.
Congressman, one of the things that's happening, I've got the first astronaut of the UAE is going to be on the program shortly. We have an up-and-coming female astronaut in the NASA program who is going up soon, we think. And so in this, when you look at science and you look at the international dimensions of it, and you look at young people that are working, collaborating, I'm just interested in what you think about that and the international dimensions. I mean, the UAE is 50 years old and they've got, somebody in space, they've got a Mars probe. That's not an everyday thing.
In the complicated world we live in, it's one of those signs that gives me hope about our relationships around the world, and for that matter, into the future. We cannot underestimate the importance of being able to access great talent wherever it may be on the planet. The people who are required to do these sort of things, and the astronaut corps, whether it's the United States or like UAE's astronaut corps also, these are the best and the brightest men and women who have what it takes to do things that are beyond the imagination of most of us, and certainly beyond the talent level of most of us. It's inspiring, and I think it bodes well for the world, even though we live in complicated times in a whole bunch of other areas.
Now, Congressman, the President Biden has said that he supports the Space Force, that he's pro-science. Just to ask you bluntly, do you have any skepticism about those commitments, and how would you expect the president to prove his commitment?
In my adult lifetime, we've had starts and stops constantly, whether it was George Herbert Walker Bush's program, and then basically Bill Clinton stepped away, or George W. Bush's program. Basically, the Obama administration stepped away. The Trump program that's pushed forward. I hope my President Biden and his administration, and we'll ultimately see when they pick their NASA director, we'll ultimately see when they make their appropriations request, how committed they are to move forward. We have a tendency in this great nation, whether it's my very conservative friends or my very liberal friends, to be so inward looking that sometimes we can't see the big picture. And that's what the Science Committee is for. That's what my chairwoman, Eddie Bernice Johnson, and I are all about. And we're going to help, I believe, encourage and move the Biden administration to fulfilling the commitments that they've made so far. After all, Congress appropriates the money. Congress passes the authorizing laws. Presidents and administrations implement what we do. I hope we in Congress will have the good common sense to make the money available and to make sure the administration follows those authorizations that we're providing for them.
I want to go to a question from our audience, Congressman, but just really fast, I want to sneak in one more. Your committee, because I've interviewed Representative EBJ, Eddie Bernice Johnson, before, and I understand the National Science Foundation budget is within your purview as well. And when I looked at it, I was so surprised. It's like between $7 and $8 billion. And I mean, that sounds like such a small number when you're talking about competing with China, competing with other countries around the world. Would you favor, why not triple that number?
There are many of us who believe that in order to overcome the damage done by COVID-19 and to put us on the proper footing, because we've had a slacking off of of public spending on research in the last 20 years. Though private industry's made up much of it, many of us believe that you're talking in the tune of maybe $26 billion in order to get us back on the right footing. And our, whether you want to call them competitors or friends around the world, are spending lavishly on this research.
Right.
They understand where the future's at. We have coasted so long on efforts that go back to the 1930s. If we continue to coast, we're going to wind up not only in the back seat, we're going to wind up on the side of the road watching them go by, so to speak.
I appreciate that insight. We have a question from David Ottolini. David?
My name is Dave Ottolini. I live in Silver Spring, and I'm a retired broadcaster and communications specialist. The question that I have for you today is, do you see a time when there might be one international space agency?
One international space agency, sir.
If you're willing to look far enough out into the future, I certainly think that is a possibility. That's probably not in the next decade or two or three, but when we start to step to the far planets of the solar system, when we talk about exploration onto other solar systems, the magnitude of the resources required and the timeline required is such that it will take a global resource commitment. But that's probably not in my lifetime.
Nor mine. Congressman Frank Lucas from the 3rd District in Oklahoma, the largest district in Oklahoma. It's great to talk to you today. I hope you come back. You should buy all your staff the Krispy Kreme Mars donuts on Thursday.
We'll be prepared.
Good to see you, Congressman. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
The UAE's Hope probe, known as Al-Amal in Arabic, reached Mars on February 9th after a 7-month journey. That was just the other day. I watched it when it happened. It was a really, you saw the people around the world looking at it. It was an amazingly, almost magical moment because, when you kind of look at the legacy of what it took to put this up into space, is remarkable. The UAE is the first Arab country to reach Mars and only the 5th country in the world to do so. Our next guest, Sarah Al-Amiri, is the UAE Minister of State for Advanced Technology, the chairwoman of the Uae Space Agency, and played a key role in this historic accomplishment. Your Excellency, it's great to see you, and thank you so much for joining us today. I should admit, I've been, when that Mars probe, Hope, was launched, I had the privilege of interviewing Ambassador Yusuf Al-Otaiba and our former chief scientist at NASA, Ellen Stofan. And I had kind of goosebumps, sort of thinking about what this may mean to a country that's just 50 years old, and you're out there competing. So tell us how you feel about the UAE and its probe right now that's circling Mars.
Good day, and thank you for having me at the show today. It's been such a remarkable journey getting to the point where the Emirates today has a spacecraft around Mars. The most exciting part for the team has been seeing the first image coming out of one of our instruments and realizing the state of what's to come when it comes to the science of this mission. It's been quite a change overall within the Emirates over the course of the last few years, but more importantly, during the time of arrival to Mars, after taking such a large challenge to get there, and with the understanding of what the outcomes could possibly be, with the knowledge that only 50% of the missions make it there successfully. We've seen such a large change in perspectives on what aspirations could be, but more importantly, a large interest in STEM, which is one of the drivers for our diversification of the economy, where science and technology is sought out to be the foundations of that diversification.
Mr. Amiri, I'm going to ask you a personal question. When you were younger, and I have to, say that you're one of the youngest ministers in a science field in the cabinet. In the UAE, in the government of the UAE. But when you were younger and wanted to be in space programs and aerospace programs, they didn't exist. You I think, went into computer engineering, et cetera, et cetera. But I guess the question we're trying to get at, as many youth in the region are beginning to look at their futures, is how did that come about? I guess, where did you get that deep desire? And how did the government eventually provide the rail track, if you will, for you to kind of get on the track for your aspiration? So it's more of a personal question than a professional one, because a lot of people look at UAE and say, wow, it hits above its weight. Wow, it's got a lot of women in government. Wow, it's got a lot of folks in science. The question is, where did this come from?
So aspiration and fascination with space happens with children of all ages. It is the great unknown, and it's the great vastness of space that usually intrigues people. And just living with young people today around me from various ages, you see a spark in their eyes whenever they think of space, whenever you look up at the sky. And for me, growing up, that was an area that I thought that I could never work in, considering that we didn't have a space program. Space programs for me growing up was seeing NASA missions and seeing what those missions can do. I've never seen something from this region on space exploration, or seen a scientist also from this region who was working within the field. So with the lack of having perhaps a sliver of hope to peg my dreams on, I did divert away from it. In 2006, that's prior to me graduating, the Emirates started what is now known as the Mohammed Rashid Space Center, and I personally fell on it completely by accident. But the way that it was developed was to develop a space program through know-how transfer and focus on hiring fresh graduates and training them up and providing with the necessary experience to start working on design and development of Earth observation satellites. And then we transferred on to Mars. That is an opportunity that I never thought would have existed for myself. I'm glad that I've been part of it. And I have a deep understanding and appreciation with what the UAE has done in starting such a program. Especially now within my current role. This program overall was an experiment in transferring know-how, building experience in a sector that never existed. And inevitably, this is what you need when you're diversifying your economy. And it's a means towards which you establish a sector, build experience, attract the right talent, and create the right environment for that industrial sector to flourish in. It's been quite an interesting journey for all of us who have been part of this. But today, children who are at my age when I was fascinated with space do think of working in the space sector. They do think that this is a possibility for them, and they can actually not divert away from their dreams and aspirations.
I know that you work in advanced technology and you head the Uae Space Mission, which is defining, and it's getting a lot of headlines right now. So, maybe budgets are easy, but, I always sort of look at, when you measure the priorities of a place, do you have the money? Is there enough resources in that area? And more importantly, does the broad citizenry buy in? In America, to be candid, I think we constantly struggle in this country more than people might think about investing in science. We just had a congressman in and saying that we're lagging in some ways behind other countries on the kinds of investments in science that we should be making, that a lot of people don't see those returns. What's the state of play inside the UAE? Is the entire country bought in, or do you still have to bring people over so that they understand the benefits of this kind of development and investment?
I think you always get the question of why is science important, especially if it's exploratory, especially if you don't see the direct link. And this is something that myself and my colleagues around the world who are working on the same areas of science and technology policymaking face on a daily basis. And it's something that's natural because inevitably you are focused on what is beneficial for every sector today and what is beneficial for the growth of every sector today. And what this mission has brought to the table in terms of discussion for the Emirates is an understanding that exploration is not only about development and finding results to our problems today and finding solutions to our problems today, but rather a lot of science and a lot of scientific development we're benefiting from today, or technologies we're benefiting today, was due to investments that happened in various sectors 10, 15, 20, 30, or even 40 years ago. And it's this continuity and understanding and continuously engaging with the public to better understand what impact science outcomes have on our daily lives and how does it push forward. Space missions, just from the intriguing aspect of it, does provide that general understanding on the importance of science and in the scientific endeavor. But it's a continuous engagement with the public on the importance of science and the importance of technological advancement and how it fits in. And we need to have a great balance between immediate returns on investments per se, and a more indirect returns that impacts various sectors.
Mr. Amiri, let me, some years ago, I think around the time that NYU Abu Dhabi opened up onto its big campus, I visited, and they were having a kind of hackathon of a lot of young students, and they attracted students from other Emirate universities, but they also had at NYU Abu Dhabi a lot of students from around the world, frankly, in the region. And it just raises this interesting question, with the Abraham Accords and normalization with Israel, looking at youth in Israel, youth in the United States, youth elsewhere in the region. Do you think you are going to see as one of the aspirations in your portfolio trying to get young people, not only from the UAE, but from this cross-region, to begin mixing and understanding that these achievements in space might be something to help open up new relations, strengthen new relations with Israel, other countries in the region, et cetera?
Absolutely. I think we're at an advantage in the Emirates, being a nation where 200 nationalities coexist. And I myself have benefited through both my education process and working with people from such a diverse background, coexisting in the same place, be it at school or be it at university. And that has benefited myself personally in terms of the growth process, but it has provided an interesting perspective that's very important to science. Diversity in science is very important because you cannot explore with all thinking the same way, with all of us having been exposed to the same way of approaching a problem. It's the differences that make science happen, and it's the celebration of the differences that makes the progress of scientific endeavors forward. And this continues on with the Emirates, both with the announcement of the Citizenship for Talent, with the long-term residency program that's also focused at scientists, researchers, and talented students, and also ensuring that our programs are inclusive not only for Emiratis, but inclusive for everyone that lives within the Emirates. It is through that we'll be able to capitalize further development, not only in the space sector, but also in other sectors for both science and technology.
Minister, just finally, I'm trying to make this cool. What's the next big UAE space mission that you haven't told anybody about yet that you can share with us?
So for me, the next big bet when it comes to the space sector within the Emirates is transferring a lot of the experiences that we've gained over the course of the last 15 years and transferring that onto the private sector. Having a vibrant space industry within the course of the next 5 years with companies that are able to export space, not only space systems, but also space products and services, to me personally and to us at the Space Agency, is our next big bet. I know it's not as exciting as heading to our next destination or announcement of a next major mission. But this is fundamental to enabling the new space economy that other countries are also capitalizing on.
I'm really happy you shared that, because I think talking about how these partnerships are going to work is probably the only way to make them real in the future. And so that's a great answer. So thank you very much. Minister Sarah Amiri, UAE Minister for State for Advanced Technology and the chairwoman of the UAE Space Agency. It's a real pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
My next guest, Haza Al-Mansouri, is a former military pilot selected for the UAE's human spaceflight program in 2018. The following year, he visited the International Space Station, where he stayed for 8 days. Haza, astronaut Al-Mansouri, it's great to see you. Thank you so much for joining us. As I was just telling you a few minutes ago, I was in the New York General Assembly. I was with the UAE foreign minister. We had a big party. You had just gone into space. And I have to say that part of the room, international people, is saying, wow, the UAE is really hitting above its weight. It's an extraordinary thing that you went into space. I start off saying, how do you feel being the first Emirati to be in space?
So first of all, thank you for having me here today. And I think it's an unbelievable journey for me and to present my country and the whole Arab region. This is such a privilege that I had back then, and to be chosen for this mission, it was really a really difficult mission for us to participate on, because we are the first from our region, from our country, and we had to go through a very fair, difficult training to be ready for our mission. It was 8 days on space with different astronauts and cosmonauts to explore and to do science and to participate with the whole world in terms of exploring space.
You know, one of the things that we're doing in today's program is we're talking to some young people. We've been doing a series of programs looking at Arab youth and what their aspirations are. And science and space are surprisingly important to many youth out there. How did you get into that track early on? I mean, you're still youthful, but there are other people that are younger. And I'm just interested in how that equation got set for you.
To speak about myself, I'm really coming from a very small village at like in Abu Dhabi, south of Abu Dhabi, which is like in the middle of desert. So my childhood was really simple, but I had that chance to look at stars and to dream about going to space. But honestly, back then in the 90s and beginning of 2000, it was really difficult for young youth in our country to dare and to say that I want to be an astronaut, because there were no like programs involving in such activities or to participate in any terms of any type of space programs. But we are really fortunate with our leaders. They have really far vision, and they planned for this moment, where they try to give us opportunities and to prepare everything for us. And now we are here. It was really a privilege to be part of this sector, to be part of younger youth, to inspire them and to tell them nothing is impossible. My background is aviator, and I choose that path because my original dream was to go to space. So when I went back in history and see the beginning of spacemen and astronauts, they were all from aviation background. So this is why I chose that path, to be a pilot and to pursue my dream. And I was really prepared in terms of my education and my physical readiness. And the opportunity came with his announcement to Sheikh Mohammed bin Rashid, when he announced in 2017 about the program. And he said back then, we are looking to choose 2 astronauts to participate in a space program, and we will choose who is capable to presenting the youth in Arab region. In our country or in our Arab region, it was like more than 30 years since we saw anyone from our country go to space. In the 80s, His Highness Prince Sultan bin Salman from Saudi Arabia, he participated with NASA. He flown with them actually back then in space shuttle, and he inspired us in our region. But since then, nobody flown to space. So it was like 30 years of disconnecting and continuing from this programs. So after 30 years, I'm fortunate, my colleague Sultan and myself to be part of this program and to continue to inspire the whole region and the next generation. A dream comes true for us, right. And we are really happy and delightful to continue and pursue this dream.
Hassan, let me ask you a personal question. You know, I've talked to many other astronauts. I had the pleasure of interviewing one of America's most famous astronauts, former Senator, the late Senator John Glenn, but also many, many other participants in the Uae Space Program. And I asked them, I said, what did you experience that was different from the rest of them? Some of them would talk about seeing Earth from far away. Some of them would talk about a kind of weightlessness. Some would talk about the fact that they were so busy on the space station that people had no idea how constantly working, people were. I just want to ask you personally, to convey what impacted you most from being up there.
I think what's really impacted me most of the thing is looking at Earth from space. It's really very beautiful view from there. And things that I think all the astronauts also agree on, there is no borders between countries. We are flying in a big mothership, which is Earth, taking us all together through space, united us. And at the same time, we are working together on board the station, despite our background, our beliefs, our colors, working together as a human beings to explore, to discover new things, and to know how we can live in space, not as different countries, but as a human, which is really important.
When just recently we saw the UAE Hope Mars probe go into Mars's orbit. This Thursday coming up, just day after tomorrow, the United States is landing another rover on the planet with lots of technologies from around the world. What do you think we should be looking for in Mars?
So when you are looking at Mars and different missions going there, it's really important to study the red planet, to know how it's ended up like this, with a very thin atmosphere, with this type of environment and this type of weather there, because this eventually maybe will happen here on for us on Earth. So it's really important to study Mars from different aspects. And talking about Mars mission and the UAE also participating with that, it's a really big thing for our country. It's a big message to the whole Arab region again and to the whole world that despite our despite that we are a young country like United Arab Emirates, we are celebrating this year our 50th anniversary. We managed to send Hope probe to Mars with successfully entering its orbit now, taking picture, trying to study the atmosphere there from different layers, and to send this all knowledge and studies to the whole scientists, researchers all around the world, which will participate in understanding more how it's ended up like this. So it is a mission of science, of exploration, and there is other also aspect of that it will also provide more information to the whole scientists in the world. Right. And I think also more it will inspire the next generation that there is a chance to be part of that. Definitely Arabs will follow us, different countries will follow us, follow our steps to participate in space programs in future also.
Just finally, Hazza, are you going to go up again?
Currently we are training on NASA for future missions. We are preparing for our future missions. Definitely we will be ready for that when we are done from our ASCAM training here at NASA, where we are getting ready to do the whole type of missions, from doing spacewalk to be ready for different type of experiments, to conduct different tasks on board the station. Definitely we will be ready for that when we are finished from this training here. And I'm looking forward again to go back to the station and to be part of amazing group of elite people on board the station who conducted different type of experiments, maintenance, and sending hope messages to the whole world.
Well, Hazza Al-Mansouri, the UAE's pioneering first astronaut, thank you so much for sharing your story with us. We wish you luck in your endeavors and really appreciate your time today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
The HOPE probe was designed and developed by the UAE and its knowledge partners at the University of Colorado Boulder, Arizona State University, and the University of California, Berkeley. Will fellowship with global scientists for a common goal lead to new opportunities, collaboration, and growth within the global scientific community? To discuss all this, we're joined now by Dave Brain, Associate Professor in the Department of Astrophysical and Planetary Sciences at the University of Colorado Boulder. Very cool place. He's the Deputy Science Lead for the Emirates Mars mission. Philip Christensen is Professor at the School of Earth and Space Exploration at, Earth and Space Exploration, let me get that right, at Arizona State University. He built the infrared spectrometry, I'm sorry, am I really just stumbling around this? He built the infrared spectrometer instrument in the HOPE probe. Great to have you with us. Noura Al-Said is a PhD candidate at the University of Colorado Boulder. Outside of her Mars research, Noura is involved in outreach activities in both the UAE and America to help encourage the next generation of Arabs to pursue a career in science. I definitely want to talk about that. And to discuss what this milestone means for the Middle East young scientists, we're joined by Marwa Al-Alawi, a recent mechanical engineering graduate of MIT, originally from Bahrain. So happy to have all of you here. I mean, this is really kind of a conversation. We can kind of turn it to, like watching Whoopi Goldberg and Meghan McCain on The View talk about science and space if you want. So anyone can jump in. But let me just start out with Dave in Boulder with your program and being the deputy lead on this space mission. I know, because people have given me some notes, that you're also obsessed with bringing as many young people and students into this, I assume like Noura and others. But can you talk to us about why this mission is so important and how you're linking it to young people today, no matter where they're from?
Sure. Yeah, there are really two components of this mission that pulled me in and got me involved. One is the science, the opportunity to understand the entire Martian atmosphere as a global system, and that's what this probe will do for us and for the community. But the thing that really pulled me in most strongly was the opportunity to grow science and planetary science in a new part of the world, the opportunity to excite students about a topic that I was excited about as a young person growing up, to see that sort of same spark in people's eyes. So I've been really fortunate to be in schools in the UAE and interact with students there, to interact with students like Noura, who you'll hear from in a minute and is amazing. And that's a really fulfilling aspect of this whole program for me.
Well, it's one of the reasons why I like this program. I created this program because I read this study done by BCW about Arab youth, and it interviewed thousands of students, male and female. And what was interesting to me is that science and appreciation for science comes so high, for both genders. And that's why I'm glad I'm here to talk with you all. But let me ask Philip Christensen, and I'm going to work on saying spectrometer. So I hope you'll forgive me. But Philip, tell me about the ASU participation in this basically inquiry into Mars.
So here at ASU, we've been building instruments now on campus for NASA for a while. And we've been engaging with students here on our campus. And when this opportunity came along to broaden that, and as Dave said, reach out to students from around the world, I thought that was just a fantastic opportunity. I think doing science from a university, space exploration from a university, gives you this unique opportunity to engage in those, engage students. And this, again, has given us an opportunity to expand that beyond our traditional borders and engage with a lot of students from elsewhere. It's been really
Phil, before
great.
I jump to Noura, can you tell us a little bit more tangibly what students might be connected to with the HOPE Mars probe?
So I think of it as an apprentice program. I learned the craft by watching really talented people. And so these partnerships have allowed us to bring students in and let them work with engineers who have 20, 30 years of experience, and just learn from that participation. There's such a difference between working shoulder to shoulder with someone and learning versus, learning from a book. And so it's been that opportunity to, bring students in touch with the hardware and let them see how it's done and just learn from people who've done it before.
Well, thank you for that. Noura, if I'm pronounced correctly, you, I guess, along with your AU Sharjah professor, this is really cool, started finding places within the region where you could build astronomical observatory sites. Right? I've heard a lot of cool things, but that's very cool. But tell us about your journey into this space, and how do I ask this without stepping on a landmine? Is it becoming a more normalized thing for people like yourself to find their way here, or is this still really, really unique?
So I was actually very lucky to be at the precipice of when the shift in the UAE's vision to invest in science and technology and actually invest in the youth to pursue those fields But at the time that I was applying to university in my undergrad at American University in Sharjah, there wasn't really much prospects. There wasn't really a job title for someone who wanted to study science, and it was something that was not very common. But within my first year, I was lucky enough to be sort of scouted by my professor for Astronomy 101 class to do a project with him, just like you mentioned, studying where in the Arab region we might be able to build observatories should we choose to do so. So that really got me excited about the research process and just doing science. And when the Emirates Mars mission was announced just a year later, I was ecstatic. I was so happy that I would be able to follow this through and end up doing science in my home turf, in my hometown, and not have to, seek it out elsewhere. So that was, I think now compared to when I was applying to undergrad, there's a lot more opportunities for students who are like me, passionate about science. I mean, that passion has always existed, as Hazza al-Mansouri has talked about. We've always been interested in sciences. It's just the prospects were not there. And today, if you ask any young Emirati what they would like to do, they no longer dismiss science as something that is unachievable, and they know that it is an option for them to go into, which is just awesome. And I'm really excited to see that it's going in that direction.
Noor, I'm going to ask you an unfair question and then jump to Marwa and ask her an unfair question. I'm excited you're both here. But you now, you've done this work at UC Boulder, University of Colorado Boulder, and you're in there, and you're also exposed to Emirati universities, I assume. You've seen both sides. I'm just sort of interested as a student, as a young person who's consuming this and making it your life. Do you have any quick reflections on what American universities can do to up their game, or what Emirati universities can do to up their game?
Oh boy. So I'm not really sure that there's too much that is different. So they're both doing amazing things in that there is opportunities for students to get involved in research. Mm-hmm. At the time, there weren't many opportunities to get involved in research at universities back home, but they are amping it up, and there's more investment into research. I think maybe recruitment of students could be done a bit more, so that you could just get as many students involved as possible and let them know that there are many research opportunities, which MBRC is doing a great job of, but there could be more to be done. And then from the American universities side, I guess I have had the privilege of being involved in the committees at my university, and I would like to see a bit more international collaboration, which again, there is some work on, but that's where you get that unique perspective of how to approach things. And I think Her Excellency Sarah has mentioned this, but having an intercultural and different backgrounds working on the same problem can really help in coming up with new ideas and new ways of problem solving that you otherwise wouldn't have thought of when you only have one culture represented. That's
great. Well, before I jump back to Phil and Dave, I want to get Marwa in this. Marwa, I should say hajime mashite yoroshiku onegaishimasu, because you also speak Japanese, I understand. Extraordinary profile in what you do. And I guess in the area, you specialize in human-machine interaction. I know you're not part of the HOPE Mars probe mission, but you are dedicated to science and furthering that dimension of science. And I'm just trying to understand, essentially, my view of the world is, if gravity is moving us there, if young people in the Arab world are going in this direction, we now have, Americans and Israelis and Arab youth studying at universities like Arizona State and UC, University of Colorado Boulder. Is that going there, or do you think there are things that still need to happen to draw people in? As a PhD engineer coming out of MIT, what's your sense? Is everything just right, or do we need to begin doing more to bring young people into these tracks?
Yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the wonderful question, Steve. So I think currently at least like nowadays, there are more and more youth from the Arab region that are gravitating towards science and technology, and they're serving as role models for even the younger generation. Especially today with the advent of the internet, you're more exposed to role models than times before. So that really helps. And there are a lot of outreach programs that I'm sure Noura has been part of and I have been part of as well, where we're endlessly trying to mentor these students and excite them about the opportunities that lie beyond, science and technology. And even during this very exciting time where the UAE is pioneering, the region's entrance into space exploration, I think that puts a lot on the table in terms of aspirations that the youth can have, starting, from very early stages when they're in school, middle school, high school, and so on. Because I think reflecting on when it was the time for me to enter university, the prospects of us dreaming about space maybe were not super high. But I think for today's youth, they can definitely dream and have aspirations as big as joining in the space collaboration that's occurring worldwide.
That's really impressive. Let me go back to Dave and Phil for a minute and just talk about these programs. Dave, not to put you on the spot, I have a friend named Ellen Stofan, you probably know. Of anyone I know, probably next to you, she's the most Mars-obsessed person I know. And she's now running the Air and Space Museum, used to be the chief scientist at NASA, has been a big fan of the Mars Hope probe mission. But I guess as you have kind of gotten into this, I tell people that when I do programs on science, which I care so much about, I sometimes worry that if Galileo were alive today, he still may not be found innocent. He might be found guilty, even though we're at the, still on the edge of so many incredible technological revolutions. It just seems like the technology is changing so much every day. I'm just interested in both from you and Phil, as you work in science and bringing this around, and you're both at universities where you sort of have to communicate this as well broadly. Am I wrong? Is there more robust appreciation for science and what we're doing than I may think? And everything's fine, or do you think we need to work harder to help generate that appreciation inside this country for what you do?
I think we always need to work harder to generate appreciation for science. And I think science is not only a benefit in and of itself, but the scientific way of thinking, the scientific process is something that I think everyone could benefit from engaging in. Phil and I both know Ellen Stofan well, and she's a great advocate for planetary science and space science and exploration. And I think she would make these same points as well. At the same time, when I'm in the classroom, I see nothing but appreciation for science among university students, from non-science majors all the way to those who have signed up to train to be astronomers. These are people that no matter what their interest is in college, appreciate hearing and learning about the kinds of exploration that we undertake, that Noura and Mara are embarking on now in their careers as well. So I think it's a little bit of both. We can always generate more appreciation, but when you take time to engage with people individually and in small groups, there's already a lot of appreciation there.
I appreciate it. Let me just tell something about Phil here for a minute. He's built 7 science instruments that have flown on NASA's Mars Observer, the Mars Global Surveyor, the Mars Odyssey, Mars Exploration Rover, and if I'm saying it right, which I'm having a problem with these acronyms, OSIRIS, REx missions, and the UAE's HOPE's Mars probe. So you're also a Mars-obsessed guy, Phil, and I would just say to you, one part, when you listen to David for a minute about scientific method, is failing. Things go wrong. Things get screwed up. We worried about putting this event too close, in a way, to the Mars Hope probe going into orbit. But I thought maybe it'd be a good lesson if it didn't work out, because there's different sides to this, and we often don't talk about failure as part of the important dimensions of scientific method. I'd love to know, just how you reflect on that and how you bring your students through it, because I think this is a very important life lesson, particularly for people in the Middle East, because oftentimes there are consequences that are very different there for failure than there are in this country.
That's a very good point. The very first mission you mentioned, Mars Observer, failed. That was the first thing I've been involved with. And I'll be honest and say it's still probably the mission I'm the most proud of, because we tried. For me, exploration is about trying. and science is about experimenting. And we learned from that, and we reflew another mission that followed up on what Mars Observer tried to do. I use that example in all of my undergraduate classes to really stress exactly what you said. Science is about trying, and it's about learning new things and doing hard things you've never done before. And you are going to fail. The character comes when you learn from your failures and you move on. Science is a dynamic thing, and it's about looking for new answers. And I think, not working the first time is an absolute key part of that.
I love that answer, and I'm often most proud of my failure, my biggest flops too, from things I tried. But Mara, let me just go to you and Noura just real quickly to close this out for a moment and ask you, as you look at that moment that mattered most when you're talking to a lot of young people about what got you hooked on this path, whether it was like Phil just described, something he's most proud of, but it didn't work out, it was an experiment. What was that risk you took that paid off, that got you stuck into this field? Marwa?
I can go first.
Yeah.
So I think when it comes to mechanical engineering, at least, the thing that really makes me continue doing it and enjoy doing it is when you work very hard to solve a problem, whether it be in terms of hardware, or even if it's a problem set. But the more that you put into it and then seeing the final result that it's working, and that you had to go through that whole process of, brainstorming and then debugging and trying to figure out what exactly went wrong. I think that whole journey of trying to figure out something and then seeing it come into existence, it gives a lot of satisfaction. And that's basically why I continued on with that path.
And Noura, let me ask you the same question. When you're out, in dry, arid regions looking for spots to look up the world or whatever it may be you're working on now, what was that moment that crystallized to get you involved, that you share with young people? Because I know you're also trying to bring a lot of people into science. So what's the hook you use?
So for me, it's that one moment that when you've done all the hard work, you've done all the research, you've built the models, you've looked at the data, for like a brief minute, 5 minutes, an hour, however long it takes before you tell someone else, you're the only person in the world possibly that knows that bit of information. And that's so exciting. And the more exciting thing is that you get to be the person who shares that information with others. And I get so excited living that moment. And then I love to see others living that moment as well. So I want to share science with everyone so they get to experience this as well.
Well, fascinating discussion. I just really want to thank all of you for the work you do, because I am a kind of space junkie. I like watching what all of you do and the prospects of it, and being involved in the very, very far fringe of it, but trying to put a little spotlight on it. So I want to thank Dave Brain from the University of Colorado Boulder, Philip Christensen from Arizona State University, both incredible universities, Noura Al-Sayed from University of Colorado Boulder herself, and Mara Al-Alawi, a recent graduate of MIT. Thank you all very much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
There is an international agreement in space above 100 kilometers. There are no national territories. It's no wonder then that there's a lot of cooperation within the international space community there, right now. Let's bring in my final guest of the program. Dr. Jessica Watkins is part of the 2017 NASA astronaut candidate class. She's worked at NASA's Ames Research Center and Jet Propulsion Laboratory and was a collaborator for NASA's Mars Science Laboratory rover, Curiosity. I should tell people that I talked to people about Curiosity, and Curiosity was a she. Avi Blasberger is Director General of the Israel Space Agency. He's leading the agency's 100% electric propulsion system initiative, as well as growing partnerships with India and countries in Africa. It's great to have you both here. We've been having fun talking about space. I usually talk about stuff that's much, much closer to the planet Earth and to whatnot, but this has been a fun program. And let me just start with you, with our astronaut, Jessica Watkins. I've talked to a lot of astronauts over my career, and am interested in what has drawn you into this.
Yes, so thanks for having me, first of all. I'm excited to be a part of this important conversation. For me in particular, I first got interested in the idea of being an astronaut when I went to an elementary school, to an enrichment program at an elementary school named after Judith Resnick. And I remember I must have asked my parents, who she was and about her legacy and her story. And I think that was kind of the first time that I realized that you could do this as a job. You could go to space. You could, explore the universe on your own. And I definitely wanted to find out how to follow that path from that moment.
Was it easy for you or tough? And I mean easy in this sense, was the pathway natural and laid out? For women of color, was this, we're kind of looking at these questions about inclusiveness in this country. And I just want to be very real. I'm so proud, so happy you're there. But the question is everything in place, or did you have to overcome a lot of obstacles as you got into the program?
Yeah, so for me, I think, the pathway was not always super clear, but I think in part because there is no one pathway to get here, which took me a while to realize or understand, quite honestly. And so I think for me, where some of my harder times or more of my struggles getting to this point were along a pathway that I thought I had to take in order to get where I wanted to go. So I went into my undergraduate wanting to be a mechanical engineer, not necessarily because I had a passion for it or because I had some experience that had led me to that, but because that's what I thought that I needed to do in order to keep that door open and that dream alive. And once I got to school, started taking classes in engineering, I just found that, like I said, it was just not something that I was passionate about. So I really had to sit down and kind of, decide for myself whether it was worth finding something that I really was truly passionate about and pursuing that, hopefully keeping the door open, but knowing that if that wasn't the possibility, that it was more important to me to follow my dreams in terms of doing something that I truly loved and something that really got me out of bed in the morning every day, versus doing what I thought I needed to do in order to have the possibility of achieving this, way far off possibility. So I think for me, the lesson in that was really finding my own pathway and making sure that I was doing something that really, truly fulfilled me every day.
It's very impressive. And Avi, I guess one of the things I'm interested in is, I've been to Israel and it's just filled with so many innovators in tech. I remind people Waze came from Tel Aviv and others. You look at the space program's technology. The UAE is now, like Israel in certain ways, hitting above its weight. It's brought together, invested in human capital and talent. You don't just wake up one day and say, I'm going to send up a Hope Mars probe and do this. There takes a lot of work. I'm interested from you about what the social contract in science and space needs to be successful as you have been in Israel.
First of all, the Israeli program started from a need. It started from the defense side because we needed an observation satellite. So at the beginning, it was a need. But afterward, when we acquired all the facilities and all the human resources, all the background, then space become natural to do science, engineering, technology. And since space is a very multidisciplinary area, it's very natural for Israel engineering and science to go into this area.
How have you brought young people into your program? We're talking to Jessica, and she got brought in, and she reminds me of a lot of young people who came in through science or special tracks inspired by someone. But I know that you have some very explicit programs where high school students and whatnot have actually helped design Israeli satellites. Tell us a little bit about what you've tried to do with your own youth.
So first of all, as Jessica said, space inspires young people. So if it is inspiring young people, then you can use that to improve STEM in general, meaning that you can bring more young people to science, technology, engineering, mathematics. In particular, we have a program in Israel that to build a small CubeSat one U CubeSat in high school students. Actually, we have now 8 high school students together build 8 satellites that will be launched very soon together. And the program was to teach them about space science, space engineering, and at the end of the day, they had a project that they built a satellite with their own hands.
Fascinating. Jessica, one of the things I raised with Haza Al-Mansouri, the UAE's athlete, I don't know if you know each other, fascinating discussion with him earlier, is that most of the scientists that I had known that went to work at like American national security labs, like Sandia National Labs or Los Alamos or others, they were scientists in addition to being astronauts. So I'm interested in what your questions are that you're interested in. What sorts of fields of science and whatnot are you interested in pursuing in addition to the work of, getting up there?
Yeah, we actually, all of us here in the Astronaut Corps and the International Astronaut Corps as well, all come from different backgrounds, some scientific, some engineering, some more focused on the aviation side. But for me, I come from a geology background. So I was kind of talking about my pathway to get here and finding something that I truly loved. And for me, that was geology. And it turns out that geology was actually what enabled me to study Mars. So my graduate work was on Mars, and then I went on to work on the Mars rover, the Curiosity rover. As you mentioned earlier on, before coming out to Houston. And so for me, this idea of certainly working on Mars is always very interesting to me, will always be near and dear to my heart. But the idea of scientists and engineers working together to really achieve the impossible and to really, gain the most data that we possibly can is really exciting. And so I'm super excited about the Perseverance rover that's going to be landing on Thursday, as well as the UAE Mars probe, as well as the Chinese Martian probe as well. It's just an exciting time for Mars, and as a planetary geologist, it's an exciting time for me.
Are you in the line possibly to go up with the Artemis program?
We'll see. Yes, I'm part of the Artemis team, and so all of us are working really hard to lay the foundation for the Artemis program and are super excited about getting boots back on the moon.
Thank you for that. Avi, tell us a little bit more about the next steps in your program. What are the objectives for Israel's space program now? What are the the next frontier of the kinds of things that Israel's trying to achieve? And also, I'd like to ask you too is, what do you think about the health of international partnerships right now? Are they improving, worsening? What's that scene like?
I think that you said in the beginning that over 100 kilometers, the cooperation or collaboration is better. It could be seen on the ISS, of course, that ISS belong to the United States, Canada, to the European, Japanese, and Russian. So, and they are collaborating over there. The space collaboration is, or what we call also space diplomacy, is very strong. I think almost every respected space agency has a lot of space cooperation with other agencies. For us, of course, we are having a strong cooperation with NASA, with the European Space Agency, with the French, with the German, Italian, Indian, you name it. And currently, we are working on a space agreement with the UAE. So you see, one of the first, after having the Abraham Accords, one of the first things that Israel and the UAE are doing is to try to cooperate in space program. So space program is a very good ground for cooperation to do joint science and joint technology together.
Well, thank you for that. We're taking questions from the audience, and we have one for you folks from Carolyn Ruggieri. Carolyn?
My question is about healthcare research in zero gravity settings. I was just wondering if all of you could provide your thoughts on the current status of healthcare research and also future opportunities in this area within zero gravity settings. Thanks.
What a terrific question, Caroline. I wish I'd thought of that. You want to start, Jessica?
Sure, absolutely. Yes, so there is certainly quite a bit of what we are doing in space in microgravity that transfers to our understanding and knowledge that continues our understanding in the medical field as well as many others, as you know, astrophysics, biology, et cetera. And so for the medical side in particular, one thing that comes to mind is that we have learned and are just starting to hone in our process of how to sequence DNA in space. Dr. Kate Rubins was the first to do that a couple of years ago, and just the other week she was up there doing it again. And from those types of experiments, we can learn new things about how molecules move and grow and build, and that we can apply that knowledge, extrapolate that knowledge down to a 1D environment here on Earth, and we can learn a lot more about how viruses interact and how we can work to eradicate them. So a lot of what we're doing up on the International Space Station has lots of applications for making life better here on Earth.
Thank you for that. Avi, your thoughts on health and what opportunities there are in space-based scientific research?
One another example is that materials are crystallizing differently under microgravity than on gravity on Earth. So there are a lot of experiments how to crystallize different materials that you cannot crystallize them here on Earth, and having new means, new medicine or other materials that you would manufacture them in space in the future.
That's fascinating. Just let me, I love this discussion. I was going to sneak one last thing here. You know, we heard the UAE Minister of State for Advanced Technologies, chair of the Uae Space Agency, Sarah Amiri, talk about the private sector, the importance of building private sector partnerships and private sector capacity. And, you know, both of you, I guess, technically work for the governments you're in, I guess. How do you think what are the best and promising practices of dealing with the private sector? Because one of the things that came up in this youth study that we did is interested in jobs, right? So you can have your interest in space, it's also an interest in jobs. And so I'm just interested in any quick reflections you may have, Jessica and Avi, on what the contours of really healthy partnerships. We see what SpaceX is doing, we see what Virgin Galactic is doing. You know, what are your insights on that? Jessica?
So
Sure, I'll take that one first really quick. Go ahead, Avi.
Go ahead, Avi.
Go ahead.
I steered traffic badly. Avi first, and we'll finish with Jessica.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So first of all, the private sector is doing very good. This is a fact. And our role is to support them and to let them grow, not to take work for the government. This is on one hand. On the other hand, the government still has the role to do the edge of technology and science, which the private sector will use in the future and not today. So many things that have been done with the government 20 years ago now can be done with the private sector. Also, if you look at the aviation sector, for example, in the beginning of the aviation sector, everything was done by the governments. Today, everything is done by the private sector. Hopefully, in the future, more and more will be done in space, but by the private sector. And yet, there is still the edge of science, the edge of technology will be always supported by the government.
Terrific. Jessica, I'm going to give you the last word.
All right, thank you. I certainly agree with everything that Avi mentioned. It's certainly the idea of coming together with the private sector and really having kind of a best of both worlds. So, the private sector brings a lot to the table in terms of, just a different risk posture and an ability to move more efficiently and faster and cheaper in a lot of senses, in a lot of instances. And then the government agency, NASA in this case, comes with the years of experience and ability to, implement some of the infrastructure and training and those types of things that have been established over time. But if we can bring both of those strengths to the table and learn to, work together and exploit that, well, not exploit has a negative connotation, but use them both to their highest potential, we end up in a situation where we are all set up for success. And then we can turn over some of that to the private sector. And then that, as Avi kind of mentioned, frees up the government to pursue exploration further into the solar system, like we are hoping to do with the Artemis program, back to the moon and eventually to Mars.
Well, listen, I want to thank you. And I should acknowledge to everybody, I'm addicted to this TV show called The Expanse. They're belters and inners and Mars and all of this. And I don't know, Avi, if you've seen it, but it's a great show. But in it, you've now made very, very real. And it's fascinating to look at what we're all achieving in a way and kind of make this available to hear for so many other people who are watching right now. So Jessica Watkins, Dr. Jessica Watkins, a NASA astronaut, thank you so much for joining us. Avigdor Avi Blasberger, Director General of Israel's Space Agency. I hope you'll both come back as you both make further steps forward. I love this topic, and I think it's important for people to hear about it. So thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, that brings us to the end of our program today. A big thank you to the Embassy of the United Arab Emirates in Washington, D.C. for its support of this program and the series, and to all of you in the audience for joining us. For those of you who missed any of these conversations, either this one or any of the ones we've had before, we're going to have all this up on our event website shortly. I'm Steve Clemens. Watch the new Space Age. Be well.